In the late summer of 2008, global financial markets were visibly cracking under the weight of trillions of dollars in bad mortgages. To the public, it looked like pure, uncontrolled panic as massive institutions teetered on the edge of collapse. But inside the walls of Lehman Brothers, the investment bank that would eventually file for the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history on September 15th, executives were not exactly trying to fix the math. They were trying to manage the story. In this internal email sent by Lehman executive Larry Wiesenack in late August, the priority was clear. He insisted that whatever they told the public had to be wrapped inside a shareholder value message. To hide the rot, Lehman executives invented entirely new corporate jargon, a deliberate attempt to partition off their toxic debt and confuse investors. They drafted plans to divide their assets into what they internally called SpinCo and CleanCo. They explicitly called this the delay game, calculating they could buy time to find cash. They hoped to avoid looking like they were relying on desperate financial engineering. They were literally trying to outrun reality. We all know the spin failed. Lehman collapsed, triggering a global economic disaster and leaving behind a highly confusing mess built on financial jargon. Someone had to explain what just happened to the rest of the world, and that translation job ultimately fell to Hollywood. By the time the dust settled, millions of average citizens had lost their jobs, their savings, and their homes. Neighborhoods were flooded with foreclosures, the direct result of a financial system built on language designed to be completely impenetrable. This presented filmmakers with an enormous narrative problem. How do you take incredibly dry concepts like collateralized debt obligations and explain them to a devastated, furious public without putting them to sleep? This graphic from the documentary Overdose shows one of their favorite techniques, extreme metaphors. Here, government bailouts are depicted as a literal drug injection given to an addicted patient, a visual shortcut to explain the risk of feeding more money into a broken system. Commercial fiction films took a different route. Directors used physical props, like pulling blocks from a Jenga tower to represent fragile mortgage bonds. Or they'd write in a proxy dumb character, a junior employee who demands the senior bankers explain the catastrophe to him like an infant, neatly doing the exact same thing for the audience in the theater. These translation devices worked. They proved so effective that they quickly codified the financial crash into a highly structured, distinctly modern Hollywood subgenre, the post-2008 film. When major studios produced movies like Margin Call and The Big Short, they didn't structure them like documentaries. They built them using the high-anxiety, fast-paced rhythms of a thriller or a heist movie, ticking down the clock to the inevitable crash. To make that thriller structure work, they had to individualize what was actually a massive systemic failure. The complex, diffuse blame of the crash was mapped onto familiar cinematic tropes, the ruthlessly cynical evil banker, or the quirky, asocial math genius who sees the numbers no one else can. When you frame a global economic crisis as an entertaining melodrama, you change who the audience is mad at. Instead of critiquing the entire deregulated banking system, viewers channel their anger at a few specific greedy characters on screen. It creates what critics call the gecko effect. Hollywood sets out to critique financial greed, but by casting A-list actors in sharp suits outsmarting everyone in the room, they accidentally make the perpetrators look alluring, brilliant, and entirely untouchable. Documentaries like Inside Job rejected the thriller format entirely. Instead, they treated the crisis like a vast crime scene. They adopted a whodunit structure, tracking the failure past individual bankers and tracing it all the way back to its ideological roots in Washington and academia. But even within these investigations, directors applied their own ideological spin. Some libertarian-backed films argued the crash was caused entirely by state intervention, framing government-backed mortgages and massive federal bailouts as the true villains of the story. On the opposite end of the spectrum, other filmmakers explicitly pushed anti-capitalist solutions. They focused on the devastating human toll of the crisis, pointing to historical labor victories, like the 1936 Flint sit-down strike, as proof that organized workers could successfully fight back against corporate greed. Unlike the tight, boardroom-focused fictions, these documentaries aimed their cameras at the real-world global fallout. They showed massive strikes in France and Icelandic citizens confronting police outside their parliament, proving the anger extended far beyond Wall Street. Documentaries like Global Financial Meltdown and Overdose lean into the doomsday rhetoric of the next financial crisis, using booming voiceovers and declarations that the world has to start planning for the next crisis, even as we realize that this one is not over yet. By treating the crash as an inevitable, terrifying force of nature, these films risk pointlessly paralyzing their audience with fear, rather than actually mobilizing them to take action. These films weren't just niche projects. The Big Short and Wall Street Money Never Sleeps both grossed over $130 million worldwide. For the first time, millions of people were sitting in theaters and learning precisely what a subprime mortgage and a CDO actually were. By successfully turning technical financial jargon into popular entertainment, Hollywood achieved an educational victory, arming the public with a vocabulary to discuss the crisis. Even the hard-hitting documentaries, armed with charts and expert interviews, largely failed to inspire organized resistance. When you present the global economy as a monolith of unimaginable wealth and impenetrable scale, the average viewer is left feeling hopelessly small. In a strange way, the filmmakers' polished cinematic packaging accomplished exactly what those desperate Lehman executives were trying to do back in August 2008. They managed the noise. By neatly consuming the trauma of the 2008 collapse as a thrilling 2-hour piece of entertainment, the public absorbed the shock of the crash. We bought the ultimate spin, walking out of the theater feeling educated, while the underlying financial machine continues to run exactly as it did before.